Hello, I'm the Blue Oak Iron Wings, and today we're going to go over some bits I've 3D designed and printed for the Colonel Wasp Firefly Shotgun. The original reason I started on this about a year ago was, like lots of other people had, issues with basically I've taken to calling it the central holder because it sits between the barrels and the actual shell, the central holder snapping. And I actually didn't do any previously to this I'd not done any 3D designing, so I thought this would be a good time to have a go, because I mean it's two cylinders, how hard could it be? Anyway, we did eventually release a copy of this, here we go, which is already up on Thingiverse. That was over a year ago, and while I was waiting for various prototypes to print, I started looking at the other parts, and I have released some of these bits already, like an improved follower and this thing I call the swinging gate. But I've ended up doing quite a few bits and tweaking some bits, so I'm going to go over them today. Let's first look at the central holder. You'll notice it's slightly longer. The idea being by extending forwards and wrapping around the barrel and the mag tube, basically holds it in place more and adds more rigidity and more strength because there's more to hang on to. The rubber gasket, which obviously sat at the front, now sits deeper down. So this bit is a bit wider here. So again, it'll grab the barrel and offer more support. But what this means is instead of fitting the rubber to the barrel and seating the barrel, you'll seat the rubber in here, make sure it's down fully, and then push the barrel in. You need to make sure it's not too far forward or backwards so that the shell fits in correctly, but I'll cover that later. I have added these little triangles here at the front recesses just because a slight annotation might make it a little bit stronger again, and it basically makes it look nicer. Next, let's look at the mag followers. You can see the stock one here and mine. When I fitted mine, I broke off some of the fins because I didn't put it in straight, so it's been a bit wobbly, awful to start with. You will also notice it's a little bit longer and it's deeper inside. By pushing the spring as far forwards in the mag follower as I can, what this effectively does is move it backward, the follower itself move it backwards, giving you more length in the mag tube for no extra cost, as it were. And while I have extended the back of here, it does not overlap the mag spring at full compression. So while it's longer, it is actually in function shorter, which gives you more space in the mag tube. Part of the reason for making this longer is where the magazine tube comes over and fits into the central holder, there was a bit of a lip, and the short one seemed to kind of get caught at an angle and be hard to move. So by having this longer, more of it sits in the mag tube and less of it kind of sits into here, making it smoother to move backwards and forwards. Basically, so this action is smoother, whereas with the short one you get caught at an angle and you have to fight to move it, but this looks nicer. So these are the final versions. I just don't want to take them all apart, I have to put them together because it's all friction fit. Next is the Extractor claw. It's no functionally different, to be honest, it's exactly the same. I just thought if the STL was out there, you could print it in your own colours to match the rest of the parts and it would be nice. Now, you have to print it this way, so you've got the strength of the layers going backwards and forwards so you don't lose the tooth, the claw at the front. But the problem with doing it that way is this hole might not be perfectly round or perfectly good, and obviously it makes it weaker this way, which normally wouldn't be a problem because obviously it's clamped. This is the other side, but it would be clamped in there. But that does mean when you're putting this together, you need to be careful that this hole is big enough you may need to file it out, that you don't split it that way. In theory, it's better to just assemble it in there, so the plastic here clamps it together. Next up is the swinging gate. I've got two here. This is an old version, which has actually snapped a bit there, which is why I've got this new version. It comes in two parts, because if you look at the fully assembled one, you can see you've got the hinge poking out one side and the tooth and the ramp on the other. This is the actual more finished version. If you can just see there. So in order to make this as smooth as possible and reduce all your support material, I've done it in two parts. So this bit will print down here with a nice smooth side to go against the shell, and the pivot is on its own little flat plate, and it just pushes through there, and you'll super glue that into place. Now, given how printers print, even though I've asked these two holes to be exactly the same size, they're not. So you will need to file this or clip this a bit to make it fit in the gap. But off camera I will trim that down, push it through and super glue it into place. And ultimately you'll be left with something like this. You can see, maybe you can't, so you can see I've trimmed the corners there, and actually once I glued it in I went over with a bit of sandpaper because it was a little bit proud, just to keep it nice and smooth. It's something else I've already released, but this is like an updated variation. I suppose you want the muzzle piece. Changes I've made here. Previously this was two models. There was one that had the sight, I suppose you'd call it, and one that had the end strike attachment point. But as I've been working with them, I've merged them into the same single scad, so I've depreciated the other one. Now the changes I've made over the version I've already released, which you can't see in this one because it's a prototype, but on that version I've actually put a slight recess in the back here, making the mag spring sit further back. Again, this increases the de facto length of the mag tube, and I believe I've increased it from a stock 6 capacity to 7. And the other change I've made is to the end strike attachment point. I basically found on a couple of attachments it wasn't fitting properly. I think this bit was a bit long and this bit was a bit long, so I've adjusted this so it should actually, oh, this bit was too narrow as well. So I've now adjusted it so it should fit with a greater variety of the end strike attachment points, including the chrono barrel, which is one thing that didn't fit, and a few other bits, so that's improved. In theory this hole in the middle here is 2mm, but yeah, you can perhaps sand that out. And the last thing we're going to look at is the lifter versus the stock one. It's a little bit different, but part of that is the design and limitations of printing. I mean, I've made the pivots out the side wider, longer, so these fit not out of the shell but completely fill the shell, whereas these are just a stub into the shell. Instead of having like an outer track and the inner track, I just filled it in and cut it out with a cylinder, because you're following the shape of the shell, so you might as well have extra material to make it extra solid. I've had to make these thicker because if I do them thinner like this with the printer they just snap off. This is ABS, so it's got a bit of flexibility into it, As part of the process of loading the shell, you push it through and you kind of have to force apart the teeth, which with the flexibility of the ABS is okay, but it's a bit of a challenge when you've got PLA. So this is a bit stiffer, but these walls here are 0.8mm, which is basically, I suppose, 2 walls if you've got a 0.4 nozzle. The 0.4 wall felt a little bit too thin and possibly going to snap off. So this is a bit tougher, but hopefully it should actually last. Now, the very key part of this is you need to point this at 0.12mm resolution or greater, because when I did it at 0.2, the steps here were too steppy, and when you were pulling back on it, it just seemed to get caught and fight on the steps. But with the smaller steps it'll move smoother, because that's basically the entire life cycle of this thing. So yeah, please print this at the highest resolution you can, and it's designed to go on the print bed that way, which will leave a whole bunch of support material here. But again, having this at a 0.12 as opposed to a 0.2 steps makes the underside smoother, so it'll work better with the spring that's there, and keeps your tops nice and smooth for interacting with the that part of the breech. Final parts. I think I've produced a shell that might be on Thingiverse already, but they're there. I will probably never produce one of these because I can't really see the point. I suppose it's simple, but I think I'd worry about layers delaminating and wearing out, so I'll probably never produce one of them. And right now I'm not going to produce a trigger. I was getting close to, because it wasn't working very well, but the shell's a bit funny, because on one side of the shell it catches here, but on the other side of the shell it catches there. So ultimately, I went into my garage, I woke up the belt sander, and I just ran this along the belt sander here, there, as much as I could there, and a bit of hand sanding here, to fractionally reduce the height on these, and it now moves a lot easier in the shell. That's everything. What I'm now going to do off camera is trim these corners here and perhaps a bit of height that way, just to fit this into here, super glue it down, and when that's all super glued and happy and dried, I'll bring you back in for the next part where we assemble these parts and hopefully chrono it. Thank you.